All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. If you've been enjoying our content, please make sure to like and subscribe. We appreciate all your support. We've got a great Big East matchup here. Villanova at St. John's. St. John's coming off maybe their worst loss in franchise history. I'm not sure, but it's not great, not looking great. Both Villanova and St. John's have lost to UConn, their most recent loss, anyways. But this will be a good one. It's a good bounce back game for St. John's. Villanova coming off a win against Butler, so we'll see what happens. Marcus, I'm going to kick things off with you. What does St. John's have to do to get back in the win column?
Yeah, I mean, just to make a quick point about their game the other night, that was, if you probably asked any St. John's fan, that was probably the toughest watch they've ever had and probably expect to ever have in their time as a fan. They didn't score for what? They didn't have a bucket for what, the last 17, 30 something, I think. It was 24, 0 for 24 to end the game. It almost sounds fake. It sounds like that will be a stat one day, like something that's brought up as like a trivia question or like an ESPN statistic, and you're going to be like, no shot that was real. But I watched it. It was real. So, 40 points coming back home now. I'd expect St. John's to be playing a lot better. I know Patino was taking that pretty hard the other night, but I'll start offensively. I think like they actually need to run actions and run offense. The other night, it was pretty much just they were at the mercy of UConn was dictating everything that they did. So like credit to UConn, their defense was very good in that game, but they were just forcing, St. John's to take the shots that they normally take, like those mid-range shots that they love to take. The tough ones in the lane, but making them take them early in the clock, and then they were, not allowing them to get on the offensive glass, which was a lot of one and dones for St. John's. So, they need to actually just run action to action and actually generate good looks. I think that would be a good start. And then if they can't do that, I think this is a matchup where they should be able to dominate the offensive glass. There's not really a strong defensive rebounding attack on the Villanova side. Like Duke Brennan's really the only guy that rebounds, and if he's not on the floor, Villanova's kind of in trouble. And in this matchup, St. John's is 20th in offensive rebound rate. Villanova's 268th in defensive rebound rate. So I think they should be able to get all over the glass and then, put a lot of pressure on the rim as well, with those offensive rebounds and in their driving actions. There's not really a real rim protector that plays consistent minutes for Villanova. So I think those are going to be avenues for them to really generate offense. I think they should be able to get to the free throw line like they always do, even though Villanova does a good job of not fouling. I think that just the way that St. John's plays sets up well to get teams into foul trouble. And then one final thing, I think it's getting out in transition, try to control the pace. This is a Villanova team that really tries to slow things down. Villanova is going to be on the road here. Can St. John's speed this up, turn it more into a track meet, at least on their end? And I'll get into some keys on the defensive end that could help that. But if they can get out and run in transition, get to the rim, use their athletes like Dylan Mitchell, get him out in transition, get him going. That'd be really big in this matchup. But shifting to the other side, I think forcing turnovers is a big reason why they might be able to push the pace and get out in transition. Yes, Villanova has done a solid job taking care of the ball. But St. John's does have the ability to turn you over, especially at home, 38th in turnover rate D. I think that they're going to be much hungrier in this matchup than they might have been if that game had gone a little bit better the other night. But losing by 32, I'd expect the pressure to be turned up a few notches here. I think they also need to limit second chances themselves on this end, because as good as they are on the offensive glass, they're not a very good defensive rebounding team. That's just in part kind of the style of defense they play, just kind of scrambling around. Guys get out of position. They're trying to force turnovers, but they're 180th in defensive rebound rate. So trying to limit those. I think like watching that game last weekend between Villanova and UConn, like UConn did a really good job of cutting off the driving lanes of these Villanova guards and forcing them to take tough mid-range twos. If they can do that, really control the ball, but also not over helping to kick out to some of these open shooters that Villanova has, because we've seen Villanova can get going from behind the arc. Right? They had 22 makes, I think, in a game earlier this year. They're 87th in 3-point percentage on the year. They're going to put them up at a high clip. So you don't want to overhelp in this matchup, but if you do, really look to run them off the line, make them put it on the deck, have to live in the mid range, and kind of take your chances from there. But I think St. John's is in a pretty good spot here to bounce back at home. But Villanova definitely hasn't shied away from anyone up to this point this year in the first year under Kevin Willard.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is going to be definitely a motivated St. John's team coming into this game. I mean, yeah, it was almost an unbelievable loss. Like, I couldn't believe. I think we'll all remember where we were if we watched that game, just because it's like that unbelievable. But Cody, talk a little bit about Villanova now and their keys to the game to beat St. John's on the road.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember that I didn't watch the last like 15 minutes of that game because it was basically already over. But I do remember looking after the game and realizing, oh my God, this team actually didn't score a bucket for the last 17 minutes. Like, it was pretty incredible. They got dominated enough in the first half to where I was pretty much done with it, moved on to a few other games. But I mean, you could also look at it from the other side. Like, Nova has revenge on their mind in this game. They lost at home at Wells Fargo to St. John's, where they actually, I mean, it was a 7-point loss, but I think they got thoroughly like dominated up front, and that's a real issue coming into this game. Like, they got crushed inside. St. John's made 58.5% of their twos. Villanova gave up 12 offensive rebounds, and that's been a real problem for Villanova in conference play, at least. Like, they didn't really play anyone in non-con that was able to get all over the glass or even like score it inside of the high clip. They didn't really play many physical front lines, and I think it came back to bite them in league play. And like, of all conferences, it came back to bite them in the Big East. Like, this is not a great Big East this year, and they're still kind of struggling to hold their own on the inside. 10th in defensive rebound rate, 9th in 2-point percentage defense, filtering for Big East play only. So like, this really hasn't been a great version of Kevin Willard's defense, which we did have concerns about coming into the season, but he's done such a good coaching job, and he's made all the adjustments that he needs to make. He does this every single year. He adjusts his defense to his personnel. So I'm not like super worried that they just get run off the floor here again. I do think Kevin Willard does have, a plan in which, to allow him to stay in this game. I think a big key is just switching up defenses. I think that's going to be really important here. They played some zone first time around against St. John's, and like, it didn't go like extremely well, but I do think just being able to mix up defenses consistently can confuse the St. John's offense that Marcus mentioned, like, doesn't really get into a particular offense. So, but you can kind of look at that two ways. Like, if they're not running much of an offense, it doesn't really matter what defense you throw at them. Like, they're just able to find the open man and hit a shot. But ultimately, I do trust Villanova on the defensive end, at least schematically, to be able to slow them down a little bit. I think they just need to be better on the glass, limit dribble penetration a little bit better. I think St. John's was able to get to the rim at a very high clip off the bounce, and Ejiofor had a pretty solid day in the first meeting. So, but ultimately, I think I do think Kevin Willard, like, they're going to slow the game down, and I think the game got played a little bit too fast the first time around too. It was a 71 possession game. Like, that's just not going to cut it for Villanova. They typically like to play in the low 60s, maybe even sometimes in the 50s. So I do think they definitely have a better shot if they're able to slow the game down. On the offensive end, I mean, St. John's is a heavy like isolation forcing defense. Villanova will play out of isolation. They're going to try to attack these St. John's guards off the bounce. I mean, the good thing about the St. John's defense is they can switch at pretty much any position and feel okay in isolation. But I do think this needs to be a pretty big Caden Lewis game. He's really the guy that can get into the teeth of a defense and find shooters from there or score at the rim on his own. And I've liked what I've seen from him in spurts. I mean, probably in like 60 or 70% of the games, I've really liked what I've seen from him. He's throwing up some real duds against quality competition, like particularly the UConn games. I know he started off pretty hot in the UConn game, kind of slowed down. The first meeting against UConn was rough, and he just, like, against top tier competition in general, hasn't been phenomenal. But I do think he's going to need to be really important in this game. He had 6 turnovers in the first time around against the Johnnies, but he and the rest of this Villanova team has been okay in this area for the entire season. So I do think there is some opportunities off the bounce, create some advantages, and maybe that can open up some shooters throughout this entire game. But it is going to be tough against the Johnnies defense. I mean, maybe get on the glass a little bit. I know the Johnnies have been pretty good on the glass, on the defensive glass in league play. They're the number 1 defensive rebounding team in Big East play, but they can be a bit vulnerable there at times if they're switching a ton, which Pitino will do pretty often. But yeah, I think it's just finding success out of primary actions and then building off of that, kind of forcing Pitino's hand, and then you can kind of not have your way, but you're gonna be able to generate some open catch and shoot opportunities. But like I said, I think the main key of this game is slowing it down, limiting possessions. I think that'll make the St. John's team that wants to get up and down the floor very uncomfortable. And I always sort of trust Kevin Willard as a dog to kind of hang around in the game.
Yeah, I think Kevin Willard he's a great coach. He's a smart coach, and just coming off that loss earlier in the season, he's going to be a little more prepared for the Johnnies here. So I'm excited for this matchup. I think it's going to be a good one. Marcus, who do you have coming out of here with a win?
I went with St. John's here. I think they bounce back. I think they have avenues to generate offense, to turn them over, to get on the offensive glass. I think they should be able to speed this game a little bit more to what they would like versus Villanova, the pace that they like to play. So I have St. John's winning this game 81-68. A nice, comfortable home win, not a blowout by any stretch, but Villanova hangs around. Johnny's hit some free throws late, win by 13.
All right, Cody, who do you like here?
Yeah, I like the Johnnies here too. I think the interior mismatch is just a little bit too much here. I think the athleticism up front from St. John's is just too much. And I think the fact that their bigs can switch on to the Nova guards, particularly Lewis, and have some success, like they're not going to get blown by consistently, I think is going to be key for their defense. And if they can generate, more transition opportunities, like if they were able to make it a 71 possession game on the road, I think there's potential for them to make it even higher possession game at home. And I think that's very bad news for Villanova. But I do like this game to be fairly tight. I think Villanova can make St. John's feel uncomfortable early on in the game. So I took the Johnnies to win this 74-70.
Yeah, I think whoever controls the tempo here is going to ultimately win the game. And I think the Johnnies are going to speed up Villanova just enough to get a victory here. I've got them winning 76-71. So pretty similar margin to you, Cody. But anything else to add here?
Hopefully the Johnnies show a little bit more offensively. That's all I've got to say. Their fans, I think, would greatly enjoy that.
Yeah, I hope so too. That was a tough watch the other day. Cody, anything else to add? Or
no? Yeah, I mean, let's just watch a little bit of a cleaner game, I guess, from both sides. I mean, obviously UConn was clean; they did everything well. But the Johnnies, they need to be better. I think it's probably a decent spot for them to kind of get right, I guess.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to wrap things up here. As always, thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.